In the summer of 2015, human remains were discovered in a lot next to the guest house during the construction of an addition at the Shelter for Homeless Men on North 13th Street in Milwaukee. Under state law, the guest house was responsible for having the remains excavated under the guidance of the Wisconsin Historical Society. The Historical Society asked archaeological students and faculty from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee to take on the complicated work of excavation and examination. Professor Patricia Richards led the team.
We agreed to have an archaeological monitor on site to make sure that their project would not disturb anything. So we did. We sent an archaeological monitor out to the site, and they began excavation, and immediately, within the first 2 hours, encountered human remains on the site. So at that point, the State Historical Society was contacted, and we worked a contract out with the State Historical Society, with the guest house, and with UW-Milwaukee's Cultural Resource Management Services to provide archaeological services to the guest house to remove the burials.
Richards and her team quickly established the burials were from the mid-19th century, before Wisconsin was a state, before Milwaukee was much more than an outpost for traders and a swampy settlement on the verge of becoming a major American city. But more specifically, they asked, who are these people buried here? And where did they come from? Only archaeological best practices can unlock the secrets of our past, as this team of experts delicately and thoughtfully work through this compelling process.
What we see when we work with human remains, and I think that is absolutely true of everybody in our program, is we see an individual each and every time. And regardless of whether someone agrees with our perspective or not, with whether they think it should have been excavated, not excavated, whether it should have been disturbed or not disturbed, the reality is urban development is urban development, and this kind of thing is going to happen. And so we feel very strongly that what we do, and what we do very ethically, is we provide that voice for that individual. And in many instances, we don't have a name, but we can say this person is of this descent, they lived for this long, their bones reflected these activities, someone buried them with these kinds of things. This is this person. And we do so in a very respectful manner, in the sense of, yes, they are people. They're not collections to us. We don't refer to these people as, the collection. They're individuals.
There's a lot of history, in Milwaukee specifically, in the United States. A lot of hard times. And people, don't deserve to be forgotten. And it's the highest calling that we can do to treat these guys properly.
As far as history is concerned, this area of land was known as the Second Ward Cemetery, also the German Protestant Cemetery, and sometimes called Grünhagen Cemetery, named after settler and businessman John F. Grünhagen, who purchased several acres of the land back in the 1840s. Grünhagen came from the Pomerania region of Europe before it became part of Germany. These Pomeranian immigrants were called the Old Lutherans, who arrived between 1839 and 1845, after the King of Prussia, once part of Germany, tried to unite the Lutheran and Reformed faiths. By 1874, Milwaukee wanted everyone out of this cemetery. These discovered graves most likely belonged to families who couldn't afford to move them.
The argument that many cities used at that time was that it was unhealthy to have cemeteries close to the settlement of humans, which is an absurd argument, but it was an argument that was used. The real reason is that they had it in mind to plat that area and sell those lots off. Also
by this time, Grünhagen Cemetery was gone from plat maps, and changes started to take place. The maps are found at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. The curator of that collection is Marcy Bidney.
The earliest map that we have here that we've looked at was from 1856, and we can see very clearly that this parcel of property is pretty much on the edge of what Milwaukee, the size of Milwaukee was. We look at maps all the way then up to 1894, and we can see then how the city is growing west. I mean, we have a good time series of these maps that show us how the city grew.
In fact, most of the Pomeranian immigrants settled west of the Milwaukee River in southern Ozaukee County in a town called Freistadt, which means free city in German. Freistadt now lies within the city of Mequon, Many of these people were considered the Old Lutherans. A small group of them settled in the Second Ward, where they became isolated and separated somehow from the Freistadt settlement. Direct descendants of the original settlers of this area and the early Milwaukee settlement still gather every year in Freistadt to celebrate their common heritage.
Kella Liesel, du bist so lieb, du bist so schön.
Professor Richards confirmed the people buried in the Second Ward Cemetery were religious refugees and associated with the Pomeranian community. However, she emphasized, they expressed a personal and not a religious identity. Richards says with a larger sample, the results might have been different.
We found not a single bit of religious paraphernalia at all, nothing. This was not a religious cemetery, so that was not the reason people were choosing to be buried in this cemetery. So they were choosing to be buried there likely because of the location.
This and other conclusions resulted from a very elaborate and delicate process. First, in the field. Uncovering each body involved digging down and boxing out each grave, then working closer to the body with wooden tools, careful not to damage the bones. The archaeologists had to cover segments of the body not being worked on so as not to dry them out in the summer heat. They carefully removed dirt from around the body, uncovering hands, feet, and the pelvis last. The remains were documented and then lifted out. Professor Richards says it took a day to a day and a half of work for each body. But the work didn't end there. We were invited into the laboratory at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee to follow the workflow and witness the care and attention to detail given to these mortal remains. The young archaeologists delicately handled fragile, brittle puzzle pieces, matching them until they fit into recognizable forms of human anatomy. The very few material bits found with the bones also help identify and define the individual narratives. Project Manager Catherine Jones.
And we bring them back to our lab for a stable environment. And so what we do is we like to go through and establish some demographics for them. So that's how old they were when they died, what sex they were, any pathology, which is diseases that may have affected them during their life, any traumas that they went through, and then if we can to see what ancestry they may have shared. So we go through a series of standard methods and evaluations. We do some measurements, we do some visual evaluation of those things and see what we can come up with.
This process revealed no specific identification of individuals and no DNA matching to living ancestors. The DNA is unstable, having been exposed to the soil and other elements. Gathering more detail would be beyond the scope of this particular project and too costly in time and expense. In total, the UWM team recovered 53 adults and 28 juveniles from 74 burial sites. Of the adults for whom sex could be determined, 42 are males, 39 females.
We have very few old people, like maybe 5 people over the age of 50 in this cemetery. Again, it's not representative, I think, of the cemetery as a whole. But it is remarkable that we have mostly young and middle-aged adults.
Evidence of physical stress, broken bones, including ankle injuries, and age were the most prevalent among the adult population, while infection and nutritional deficiency more heavily affected the juveniles.
Young women show a lot more of what we call degenerative joint disease, which is the kind of thing that's associated with very hard labor, particularly carrying heavy things. And you see that in the lower lumbar vertebra, you see it in the knees, you tend to see it even in arms and legs to a certain extent. So men perhaps living a little bit more dangerous kind of existence in terms of things they're doing daily, women just working really, really, really hard. The real dichotomy between the youngsters and the adults with regard to nutritional stresses. I mean, I guess I wasn't expecting it to be quite so dramatic with the kids and almost absent with the adults. And that just tells us a lot about immigrants, I think, and the immigrant experience a little bit, and the fact that people came here for a variety of reasons, perhaps not really understanding the impact it was going to have on that next generation. And how would they? I mean, you're not going to know what they can, what they expect necessarily. So that was surprising.
Richard says it's very likely younger individuals were exposed to new diseases and inadequate medical care, which also affected newly arrived immigrant groups. As Professor Richards writes her formal report for the Wisconsin Historical Society, she reflects on those forgotten souls from the Second Ward Cemetery.
When you have an urban area that changes rapidly, and you have different groups of people living in that area who have ties to it, but they move on, and that happens in urban areas, of course, and the nature of the neighborhoods change. The cemeteries, that link between the living and the dead, that link is so easily broken. And when there's no physical sign of it, then really what ends up happening is those folks are forgotten. Humans really need that link to their past, and I think that if the link isn't personal, it should at least be cultural, or it should be social in some way. And I think we're all a little bit less human every time those links are broken.